Welcome, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have a friend, Laurie Harbour. Laurie, good to see you.
To see you. Thanks for having me on, Jamie.
Yeah, so glad you could join us. A little introduction. Laurie is a partner at Wipfli. She's very passionate about manufacturing, long history in manufacturing, helping connect the experienced talent of today that will many of which will be retiring soon, and the new generation of manufacturing workers that bring in with them new tools and skills and technology and efficiency. It's also the author of Tradition Meets Transformation, and so that passion is kind of what we want to talk about today. The leader's role in bringing in the next generation in manufacturing. So why don't we start with this? What's the problem statement? What's the gap as you see it in the next generation, or getting the next generation in and engaged and involved? How do you see the gap that we have to solve in mostly American manufacturing?
It's a great question. I mean, if we go back even to when I was raising my children, right? I mean, we all that started in manufacturing started to take some of the advice of people and tell our children to go into college, get a 4-year degree, and don't go into a skilled labor or into a skilled trade. Maybe go into engineering, but even in some cases, we didn't push them there. So they went into financial services and banking and medical and so on and so on. So we sort of, as a generation, kind of pushed people into new careers. And we had a huge gap, right? I mean, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we just have in all our manufacturing companies, sort of a gap of that sort of 35 to 45-year-old employee. So they went on to do other things, and then the Great Recession hit, and then people said, well, I really don't want to be in manufacturing now, right? Because they were affected. So with that gap now, we have an aging workforce in manufacturing. We are starting to get younger people excited about it again at a stronger level than before, but still not like back in the 60s and 70s. So we have just a missing group of people, and we need to find a way to connect them, because the new generation coming in manufacturing has some new tools and skills we weren't educated in when we were in college.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I still remember some of the machine code I wrote, 35 years ago, and it's a whole. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that again today. But those tools are fully outdated. So before we get to the skills themselves, what's the impact of that gap? Whether it's the impact on companies specifically, like how do they experience that gap, or our manufacturing economy as a whole? How would you define the impact of that gap that we've seen?
The thing that has gone along with that same gap is this, growth of manufacturing around the world. So Southeast Asia pressures, Mexico pressures, Europe, other areas where we've moved some of our manufacturing. We didn't have the people, so it made it even easier to move those into lower cost regions. And so as we now begin to bring people in, or like if you think about the COVID spike of manufacturing that happened in North America, well, around the world, but in North America specifically, we couldn't find people. People didn't want to work. We didn't have people in manufacturing. So we ended up hiring, temp labor and people who wanted jobs, but they weren't skilled, and we didn't train them well. And they ended up impacting quality. They had, companies today have 30-40% turnover because they just don't engage the younger workforce and train them well and retain them. So we're falling down and kind of developing these people, and it's creating quality problems, delivery problems, safety numbers. We benchmark manufacturing companies around the country, and safety numbers have gone in the tank, and so has the quality numbers in many cases. So there's just a real gap and a real impact that's costing, dollars to manufacturers in order to get out good product.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and that safety thing, I've seen that, up close. When you don't have that experience in the base. So let's talk about those skills that the workers bring in. A lot of people will say, well, being good at social media isn't going to help you in manufacturing, but that's a pretty narrow way to look at it. How do you see the benefit and the gains that new generations come in with in terms of new skills or just new thought patterns?
Probably the biggest area that I see is around technology, right? The younger generation that either was in high school and chose to go into manufacturing or did go into college and is now choosing to go into manufacturing, they were trained with technology. Right, maybe not social media, but at the end of the day, what they're learning in Excel and in, program code and in Power BI and systems allow us in to really look at data differently. And I know you and I share a similar view in that when you're going in to fix a manufacturing plant, we got to know what the data tells us, right? That the data tells us a story. And so we have a whole series of young folks that work for us, and their speed and level of efficiency in this technology is not only 10 times more than mine, but they know stuff I couldn't even know, nor some of my experienced engineers. So they're taking data, they're looking at it differently, and they're giving us a story. And most importantly, I think this younger generation coming forward, they don't like inefficiency. So they will look at processes that, someone my age might create and go, hey, can I change this? Because I think I can make this easier and problem solve it and put things in place that allow us to not have a problem or a defect. So they were trained in technology, but maybe not manufacturing process. And now we've got this experienced group of people that understand the process, but maybe don't know how to get the data. So I think there was a real gap that I've watched them really dive in and help contribute to improvement in companies.
Yeah, I love that because, yeah, as you mentioned, we both have fought for good data to go do problem solving with for decades, and it's, I'll say, never been easier, but certainly important as well. Um, so you kind of highlighted that as a little bit of a everyone has strengths, but those strengths are different. Um, and so is that about collaboration? Is that about uh, taking your more experienced leadership and teaching them technology? Is it about bringing the experience into the younger generation? How do you get the most out of those different skills in the different generations in the manufacturing environment?
Yeah, great question. We have been studying manufacturing companies for a long time, and in small and mid-sized manufacturing, really kind of the heart of the manufacturing belt. And as you know, a lot of them are family owned, third, fourth generation folks. And as you're training up some of those people, you're realizing that this older generation, some of them, not all of them by no means, but have sort of a misperception of the younger generation, and they think that they need all of these years of experience to be able to contribute. So we have 30 years to train somebody who's 22 to be in the role I'm in, as president. And the reality is that sometimes blocks our ability to bring these together. The best companies we've seen are embracing the younger generation. Now they're not allowing them to go out and make massive decisions on their own that will impact the business, but they're putting them in teams, bringing them into problem solving. So taking the experienced, think about a stamping process tech in a big stamping operation who knows how to make that die run every single day, not necessarily looking at data, but his tribal knowledge just allows him to do that. And this young engineer who's 24, 25, or maybe he's not even an engineer, but somebody who's capable of looking at data and information, studying the process, and learning from that experienced person. So we need to be able to be humble enough as an older generation to say, look, I've got all this tribal knowledge, but that doesn't make me perfect. How do I take some of the data this person's bringing to me and help teach them how to then learn to get the die working? Use the data, let me teach them, and then vice versa. The younger generation has to not necessarily say, yeah, I don't want to learn from those old folks. They need to say, look, I need to learn that tribal knowledge that he learned when he didn't have the data that I do. And how do we put those together and then bring them into that engagement? And the best way to keep and retain that young workforce is to get them engaged, teach them, coach them. They want to, the younger generation wants to make an impact. And They want to know they're listened to and heard. And if we engage them, those are the companies we see really driving throughput and efficiency.
Yeah. No, I love that, getting them engaged. It certainly goes to that high turnover issue. People that are engaged, much less likely to leave. And of course, people that are engaged are much more likely to leverage the talents that they bring to the table.
Mhm.
So, as you said, you bring those people together, those generations together, those different experience sets together. So, getting them in the same room is, I'll say, half the battle, right? But then the rest of the battle is getting it to work, getting it to meld. So, what are some of the either barriers, maybe more so the solutions? How do you get the most of that so everybody doesn't, they come in the room and then they run to their corners? How do you actually get people to then collaborate once you bring them together?
Right. The leadership challenge 101, right? It's that experienced facilitator or leader of that meeting who is open-minded and willing to brainstorm, right? And that's really what you're doing is you're saying, "Hey, here's problem X, right? We've got quality or can't keep the press running or whatever the issue is. How do we attack that?" So some of it could be here's how we used to do it, and here's how, and then engaging the younger workforce in that, but facilitating a process where we can have open brainstorm dialogue. No discussion is bad discussion. What do you think about this? What is the data telling us? Right? I learned this from one of my now retired engineers. He said to me, Laurie, every time I go into a plant and I hear I think and I feel when we ask a question, then we know we've not done our job because we're not using the data and the information and talking through it and really problem solving that. We have to be able to train the younger generation, show them, ask them open-ended questions. What did you see? Maybe go out on the floor before you actually even get into the conference room. What do you see and what are you observing in this process to that younger generation? Okay, now let's go back in and talk about that. And why is it like that? And really, the best company leadership has that culture that allows for that discussion because what we don't want to do is attack the older generation and say, well, why do you do it that way? But we also have to create a culture that says, so why do we do it that way? Is there a better way? Maybe not. But let's talk through it. Is there new technology we could apply? That type of thing. So at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership and facilitating that dialogue between the two generations.
Yeah. When I love those sort of red flag words, think and feel, right? We're basically acknowledging we're tapping into. I mean, it might be valid, right? It could be that we're tapping into
Mhm.
some intuition, but let's not stop there, right? We're missing something more, and so those are really useful sort of red flag words to watch out for to say, hey, there's something bigger we could more clear we could go after. Um, so let's get into some of the individual leadership because we've come back to that word a couple of times. And let me kind of hit both generations. And I know it's not just two generations, there's a whole spectrum there, but you meet, work with, advise so many different leaders. If you're sitting there with some of the outgoing generation, maybe they're a plant manager, head of operations, maybe they're CEO, maybe they're owner. Um, what's your advice to them as an individual leader for how they can move this problem or this gap forward?
Really is about thinking open-mindedly about what they can do with the next generation with and setting up the structure where that works. So mentorship, right? Find the right experienced people in your team that are willing to mentor. Not every experienced person in a company is the right coach or the right mentor for that younger generation. But it for me, the biggest challenge is the hurdle of that owner or leader, right? Is getting them to understand that there's value here with this generation. And then we have to create a culture that embraces that and has purposeful meetings. So I have a client out in Colorado who embraces this wholeheartedly, and he will bring in a very cross-functional group of people from the floor, from engineering, from the die shop, and take them into an annual strategy planning session. And he'll bring them in quarterly for that 1 year and say, I want to open this up to your ideas. What does my company look like in 10 years? What brainstorms do you have? Doesn't mean they're all going to get implemented. So, my work with these companies is trying to get them to evolve their culture first at the leadership level. Open your mind to this, right? I have clients who their son or daughter is 30 or 35 and ready for the president role. And they're like, oh, no, they're not going to be ready till they're 50. And I have others who I have a client who it's a $65 million molder, put their daughter in charge at the age of 31. And their profits have gone up, their revenues have gone up, and they're killing it. Now they had a structure. They put a board of advisors in place. They're there meeting with her on a regular basis. So there's a safety net, for lack of a better word, and a mentorship. She's in a CEO group that we lead, and right, so she's got all these different avenues of mentorship to allow her. So it really is about that culture of openness and trying some things, trying it where it's not dangerous, and then be able to course correct quickly when necessary.
Yeah. And I love, when you talk about senior leaders that they have to change, right? That's part of this. And it's very easy if you're 2 years away from retirement or 5 years away from retirement saying, okay, I'm just going to ride my experience from here on out. But I love working with people that at that time in their career, they still look at how do they transform themselves, the situation and the need. Henry Ford once said, I believe something like, anyone who no longer learns is dead, whether they're 8 or 80. And I kind of love the sentiment of that. So now let's go to the newer generation. So let's imagine you're a young, factory supervisor or process engineer or a planner, right? And you're in the organization. You may not have a lot of control over things, but you want to make a contribution. What's your advice to those individuals about how they can make the most of their situation?
It's a great question because this generation has grown up with all kinds of challenge, not that we didn't, but all kinds of different challenges, right? I always joke, like, I'm so glad social media wasn't around when I was growing up, right? So those are some of the things that they struggle with in terms of just interacting with their peers. And so that's led to some different behaviors as they come into leadership. And I think the most success I've seen in coaching up some of these young leaders into, plant managers and operations managers and ultimately VPs and presidents is humility, right? It's that there's some amount of, and I don't mean to put a sweeping statement across everyone in this generation, but there's some ability to where they believe that they know more than they do, and they call it, in fact, the imposter syndrome. Like, inside they actually have this fear, but yet they, on the surface, they come across in this way. And even the leader I just spoke about, I think the biggest thing that's been her success is her humility. She learned very early on that I don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but I have to facilitate the dialogue and ask questions. And so she's super humble, and she asks for help, and she seeks out mentorship with people that she knows will make her better. She wants to be uncomfortable every single day. And I have other leaders who grew up through second and third generation parents and grandparents in the more arrogant fashion. They're deserving of this role of president because my father created this company, and not so humble and not going out in reaching out for help in the same way. And so they have to be able to understand that the generation that went before them, or generations, have a lot of knowledge to impart. Now we're not all great at doing it, so I understand why they get upset sometimes, but open your mind to those people who can mentor you and can help engage you in your career path. And I think where that has happened, and just seeing tremendous success, and people like yourself and me and others have written books about what makes companies successful, and that is really at the core of it. You can do the data and see people are more profitable and more efficient when they engage together like that.
Yeah, that's great. And I have to say for myself, that was a lesson I needed very badly early in my career, and I was fortunate that I had the right mentors who gave me that lesson. And then I'll say, glad that I accepted the lesson, right? Because we don't have to just because it's given to us. And and that absolutely helped me a lot. One last thing. So we kind of talked about what a company can do. You besides writing a book and giving an awful lot of speeches. Your LinkedIn and your Delta accounts are probably hyperlinked to each other as you go around sharing your experience with audiences everywhere. But whether it's you as an individual or Wipfli as a firm, what are you doing to help with this particular challenge?
Our focus is absolutely about embracing the change in culture and the openness of people and making an impact in manufacturing. Right, wrong, or indifferent, manufacturing is, to me, one of the most exciting places to be. I mean, there is so much cool technology happening, and there are so many companies we didn't even think about. I mean, I was just in Green Bay and visited 4 completely different companies, from food to machining to, I mean, it was just amazing, right? So the opportunities are immense. These are very good jobs. And so I personally, in all of my walks of life and my LinkedIn and what I'm trying to do and in a new potential book I'm working on now is about how do we really become passionate about this cool business that really drives our country, right? And embracing diversity in that, right? Be able to get, we have 50% of the population that are women, and a lot of women are concerned about getting into manufacturing. So I'm sharing stories of cool technologies and cool companies to visit and helping to educate our educators, right? And I a quick story. My daughter was younger than my son, and her school counselor was the same as my son's. And I went in many years ago now because she's graduated. And I said, "Hey, you had my son." And she said, "What happened to him?" I said, "Oh, he became a tool and die maker." And she went, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And that led me to a path and a passion to educate our educators because, that son of mine makes 6 figures,
Yeah.
and he loves his job, and he creates, impeccable technology. So we need to help people understand that manufacturing is, and frankly, he's smarter than half the people I went to engineering school with.
Yep.
So it's just about Mike Rowe's out there talking about it. My passion's the female Mike Rowe. I want to tell the world how great this is and get this, to be a very staple part of our country moving forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective, your experience, and I wish you the best on a very important mission.
I appreciate it, Jamie. Good seeing you.